In the 1960s, Southern Pacific was experiencing problems on the tunnel systems, and of course snow sheds too. This problem was easily combated, however, through the development of the cab forward during the age of steam. However, when Southern Pacific gave in to dieselization later on, the new problem then was the engine overheating. While Electromotive Division came up with both the SD45, followed by its Dash 2 predecessor, the engines themselves still had a serious problems that still resulted in the engine overheating. And thankfully, not that I hate the SD45s though. In fact, they're considered another one of my favorite diesel engines from Electromotive Division. And thank God mine's everything seems years later in the 1980s. So now you're probably wondering to yourself, what exactly would Electromotive Division do to fix the problems the SD45? Electromotive Division went back to the drawing board and decided to redesign the body of the SD45s, specifically its rear end body, by building some kind of hollow grid section below close enough to the ground to allow cold air to flow inside the locomotive's body, preventing the engine from overheating. So this became the result. Into this, the tunnel motor. The first tunnel motors was built with the SD45T-2s. SD standing for Special Uniform, 45 for Model Series, T for tunnel motor. Southern Pacific provided the majority of the units with copper belt, also received very good years, and they were quickly put to work straight in the Southern Pacific system. However, it didn't take long for Denver to also take an interest in tunnel motors too, and so of course it has the motor Electromotive Division decided to use SD40-2 as reference, and I guess you can also see where this is going, I guess. So from 1975 up until the start of the 1980s, the Electromotive Division developed and built a second model of the tunnel motors dubbed the SD40T-2, a tunnel motor equivalent of the SD40-2 series. The only difference had to do with production line. Production of the SD45Ts lasted from 1972 to 1975. The SD40T-2's production lasted from 1974 up until the start of the 1980s, with the majority going off to Southern Pacific at a total of 229 units, 73 units to the Denver and Rio Grande, and 10 for Cotton Belt. While there were mostly units on the freight service in the Denver and Rio Grande, 1960, but on some occasions, Rio Grande also assigned units to passenger service and ski trains, until obviously the engine its engine later on, Southern Pacific would later acquire the Denver and Rio Grande's motive power and still retain the Southern Pacific. And of course, they did the exact same thing with Cotton Belt too, acquiring their motive power and just giving them the Southern Pacific specification markings. This is what also kind of led to the inspiration of the Southern Pacific speed paint job as well, because of the Rio Grande's spelling the letter G. So then, somewhere in 1988, Southern Pacific decided to rebuild the majority of their SD45 tunnel motors, now being dubbed SD45T-2Rs, assuming that the R designation stands for rebuild. Hopefully someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments later on. And yes, almost the majority of the former Cotton Belt SD45 tunnel motors also got the treatment too as being rebuilt into SD45T-2Rs, and of course being renumbered in the process, which is Southern Pacific system, including the majority of their motive power, which eventually received Union Pacific armored yellow colors, including all the tunnel motors. However, the SD45 tunnel motors, meanwhile, had a much more different treatment than their 40T predecessors. Originally, after being repainted armored yellow, originally they were numbered with 4795 to 4829, but then, starting in the 2000s, were renumbered with the 28 Locomotive series road numbers, and were classified as SD40-2Ts. So naturally, that just makes them ordinary SD40 tunnel motors, but have the last two digits of this being flipped around. Not to mention, the original road numbers for the units were originally considered the pre-rebuild. But after the 1990s into the 2000s, after being renumbered, had to be the post-rebuild for these units. Their life on the Union Pacific went back to sailing in the next few years until 2009, where they eventually be killed off the roster, and Union Pacific got their hands on some of the more modern-day locomotives like the Evolution series and the SD70S. Nowadays, they can only be found on short lines in leasing companies like Progress Rail, Larry's Truck and Electric, the BLE, DIMR, Wheeler and Lake Erie, RJ Corman, and Rex, and a few other short lines and leasing companies too. In 2010, Norfolk Southern did lease a few of these former Union Pacific tunnel motors around their system. Same thing goes with CSX as well. But that was before the units were killed off Union Pacific's roster. However, their time being used as foreign power was short-lived, as it mostly had to do with how their rear steps were constructed in a steep angle. This problem also originated all the way back in the days of Conrail, despite Conrail having experience with Denver and Rio Grande in Southern Pacific tunnel motors too, back in the days of Southern Pacific. Of course, some units also found homes on railroads too, like MRI, specifically units like 2829, alongside 2846 on the North Plains Railroad, alongside a few other units too. One of the Progress Rail units has even been repainted green, still wearing Progress Rail lettering on its body. The ones meanwhile over on Wheeler and Lake Erie still retain their Rio Grande heritage. But meanwhile, over on the BLE and DIMR, which got a certain Class 1 railroad interest in them, beginning somewhere near the end of 2010, specifically somewhere in December, Canadian National would acquire the BLE and DIM's motive power, including the majority of their tunnel motors, which, fun fact, are actually rebuilt with the SD40-30 specifications. So naturally, that just makes them SD40-3 tunnel motor hybrids, despite pretty much still having SD40T specifications to them. They could have called it something like SD45T-2s the more I think about it. Anyways, they will become acquired by Canadian National of all railroads, the same railroad that would later acquire the majority of City Railways' Evolution series, these GROs. Of course, we have Precision Schedule Railroading and E. Hunter Harrison to thank for that. And were pretty much renumbered where the original Canadian National Evolution series left off. That's it. They just got renumbered, and that was about it. And even as of 2025, they're still currently roaming around the Canadian National system, with some units even being repainted in Canadian National colors, both from BLE and DIMR. However, they still do have the reporting marks on the sides of their bodies. Some units, meanwhile, retain their foreign flag colors. those Canadian people watching, because that pretty much defeats the whole purpose and what the tunnel motors were initially designed for. The vast majorities of tunnels on various railroads and systems, but either way, the tunnel motors now have a new purpose in life.